140 Girl Scouts arrived at camp for a 2-week adventure in the wilderness. They were looking forward to swimming, fishing, boating, hiking, singing around the campfire, sleeping in tents, and making new friends. The first night of camp, the tents were full of giggling, excited, loud little girls. Some wrote letters home, and they got to know each other. Even though bedtime was at 9 o'clock, some girls inside the tents didn't quiet down until 1:30 a.m. The next morning, a camp counselor woke up early at 6 o'clock to try to get in a warm shower before the girls awoke for the day. However, on the way to the shower, she saw 3 sleeping bags along the trail with a body alongside them. They would soon discover the bodies of 2 other girls inside the sleeping bags. These 3 girls had lost their lives during the night. How were they murdered in a campground with multiple other campers and counselors nearby, and no one heard a thing? Hi, I'm Mindy. Welcome to the Missing Link channel. Each murder and unsolved mystery is just one missing link away from being solved. Hit the subscribe button so you don't miss a video and help us find that missing link. This is the 3rd video in this series on the 1977 Girl Scout murders in Oklahoma. If you haven't watched the first or second videos yet, you will want to watch them before watching this video. I will put a link to video 1 and video 2 above. In the first 2 videos, we discussed the details of the murders, who was accused, the trial, how he was acquitted in the trial, and how further DNA testing was not able to provide any new leads in the case. In this video, we are going to discuss who could have committed the crimes, what the families have done since the murders, and answer a few questions I have about how the murders were committed. So, let's get into who likely committed the murders. Because Hart was found not guilty, the case remains open to this day. Is the murderer still alive, or did he or she die years ago? Who would have committed this awful crime? Obviously, a true monster. I see 5 possible scenarios. Number 1, Hart was a real killer, and he killed the girls by himself. There was no smoking gun, as the prosecution pointed out, but there was definitely circumstantial evidence pointing him as the killer. 2, Hart was the killer, but he had an accomplice. This would help explain how the counselors never heard any commotion, screams, or evidence of a crime during the murders. An accomplice would make it easier for the killers to work together and move the 3 bodies away from the tent area. 3rd, Barbara Day, the director, told this story about the night of the killing. After dinner, they realized that the camp had already run out of milk. So Barbara and her husband headed into town about 7:30. It was still light out at this time. Just after leaving the camp area, they saw a car with 4 people inside. They weren't on the property of the camp. When Barbara and her husband returned, about 30 minutes later, the car and the people inside were gone. Did these 4 individuals have anything to do with the murder? The gate wasn't closed or locked, so the vehicle could have driven into the camp. However, the vehicle would have had a hard time sneaking back out, since the gate was locked that night and not opened until the police were on their way. Or perhaps they hid their car outside the gate and walked into the woods of the camp and waited until nightfall. 4th, Another stranger who was wandering the area came upon the camp and committed the crime. Fifth, someone inside the camp committed the crime. But not many people were ever on their own. They had other people sleeping in their cabin or in their tents with them. They would have had to sneak out at night, commit the crimes in silence, somehow clean themselves up. You would assume they would be covered in blood, and then get back into bed before anyone woke up or noticed they were missing. Who do you think committed the murders of Denise, Michelle, and Lori? There were 3 possible lives that were saved that night. The first was the original girl that was supposed to be in tent number 8, but for some reason, she didn't attend camp. The second, another girl wanted to move from her unit to Kiowa and sleep in tent number 8, but due to the weather, this wasn't permitted. Third, another girl named Angela Sweet, age 10, went to camp with 4 other members of her Girl Scout troop. When they arrived, Angela was told that she was going to be moved to another tent because they didn't think 5 cots would fit in her tent. She was saddened to not be bunking with her troop mates. She was taken to Kiowa and tent number 8. There were 3 girls inside she didn't know, but soon she got to know Denise, Michelle, and Lori. They soon became friends. She recalled that there was a box of donuts left outside the tent prior to them moving in. They assumed it was from another girl. The director then came to the tent and told Angela that they were able to squeeze 5 cots into the tent, and she could now bunk with her troop mates. Angela recalls when she went to her new tent, we all got settled in. One of the girls needed to go to the latrine, so we all got up to go together. You know how girls play jokes on one another? We were on our way to the latrine, and on our way there, we noticed 3 flashlights that were coming towards us, so we all screamed. The flashlights disappeared. Angela wonders to this day if the flashlights was from kids at camp or possibly the murderer or murderers. The girls headed back to their tent, which was far away from tent number 8. She described that a girl from another tent had come to their tent and made herself look like a bear from her shadow and ran her hands down the tent to act like bear claws. Angela explained, we got scared and went to the camp counselor, telling them we wanted to go home. But we were told everything is okay and to go back to the tent, and we could call our parents in the morning if we still wanted to. Angela recalled it thundering as they were falling asleep. The next morning, she went to breakfast, not knowing anything was wrong or what awful events happened overnight. They were soon told that they would be returning home since something was wrong with the water at the camp. She remembers being so sad. When the buses arrived back in Tulsa, the director started reading off names of the girls. When they heard their name, they were supposed to hurry and get off the bus. When Angela's name was called, she dropped something and bent down to pick it up. But by the time she stood back up, her name was called 3 times. When Angela started heading off the bus, she looked outside to see her mother, and her mother had fallen to her knees in tears. Angela was so confused. When she got off the bus, there were parents and media cameras. Her mother gave her the biggest hug. Angela asked what was going on, and her mother told her that they would tell her everything when they got home. After they got home, her mother explained what happened, but didn't know the girls' names. what tents they were in, or even what unit. When Angela saw the photos of the girls in the newspaper the next day, she stated, "I told my mom those were the girls I was going to spend the night with. And 3 or 4 hours later, I moved to my troop's tent. My mom began crying all over again." Needless to say, Angela had nightmares and needed counseling to help cope with this information. How close she came to falling asleep in tent number 8 that night. She always wondered why she was saved. If she had fallen asleep that night in tent number 8, would she have died that night too? Or would something have changed? And would they all have survived the night? I wonder, were the donuts that were left on the steps of tent number 8 laced with some type of sleeping pills? Was this the reason no one heard anything from the girls during the attacks? Remember, no one in Kiowa claims to hear any crying or any screaming that night. The only girls that heard this were from other units. Did the murderer drug them before entering their tent in the middle of the night? Let's focus on that for a moment. That is the most important thing I can't figure out. How were 3 atrocious murders committed with multiple people nearby, and not much was heard, if anything? The district attorney, named Wise, thought the same thing. He said it was puzzling how the crime could have been committed without arousing anyone. That's the mystery that befalls us all. The girls in tent number 8 were most likely awoken during the night, then attacked in their tent. Did the girls not scream, cry, or call out for help during the attack? Or did they, and no one heard their pleas? I guess I can't say no one heard them, because remember at 3 o'clock, 2 girls from other areas of camp heard 2 strange things. First, a girl heard a scream come from somewhere near Kiowa. Second, another girl heard a scream and a girl crying, "Mama, Mama." These girls weren't sure what they could do and ended up just going back to sleep. But honestly, there isn't much they could have done. If they would have done something, it could have risked their own lives. Remember, there were 8 tents in Kiowa, 1 counselor's tent, and 7 Girl Scout tents. Tent number 8 that the victims were in was 79 yards directly across from the counselor's tent. But the counselor's tent could not be seen by tent number 8, or vice versa, because there was a building in the way. The other 6 tents were between them and in the form of a half circle. The individual tents were various yards apart, but it looked like tent number 7 was about 15 yards or so from tent number 8. Some people explained that the tents were sturdy structures on platforms that could keep out some noises, especially with the flaps all being down. Plus, the trees and undergrowth would help absorb the sound as well. But remember, the counselors talked about hearing all the chatting and giggling of the girls before they fell asleep. They didn't seem to have a problem hearing them before. The counselors claim they didn't hear anything unusual after they fell asleep, and I don't know why they would be lying. If they had heard something, especially from someone that was being attacked, so would some of the other girls from Kiowa. Some counselors and other girls were probably exhausted when they finally fell asleep sometime after 1:30. Plus, the counselors were teenagers or in their early 20s. I have a teenager. She could sleep through anything, and she could honestly sleep all day long. She sometimes doesn't even hear her loud alarm go off. Was there possibly some noise, but everyone just slept through it? If the killer did stay at the cabin and steal the tape and the crowbar that was possibly used in the crime, did he not take the gun because he knew that it couldn't be used in the crime? Because a gunshot would draw too much attention to his crime. It would definitely have been too loud. A gunshot would likely wake up the entire camp. Remember, a girl from tent number 7 claimed she was awoken by a figure shining a light into their tent. Was this one of the counselors, or was this the killer? Did he decide for some reason to not attack this tent, but just go next door to tent number 8? But he was taking a risk because he had just woken at least one girl next door. What if she had gone for help? Let's say he did go next door after this and did the same thing. He shined a light into tent number 8 and woke up the girls. I would imagine he would have threatened them right away and told them not to make a sound. But most of the attack happened in the tent. I guess if he tied them up, bound them, and put tape on their mouths, maybe they couldn't scream. Since Lori wasn't tied up or bound, maybe she was the first victim. She was such a little girl that I would imagine one blow with a crowbar or another weapon would definitely have knocked her out, if not killed her right away. So maybe it is plausible that the girls didn't make much noise. They were probably so scared they may have listened to the threat and not made any noise. The other question I have is, were the murders random, or was one or all of these girls chosen by the killer? Or was the tent chosen because of its remote location, and it didn't matter who was inside? There was a note left at camp 2 months before saying that they were on a mission to kill girls in tent 1. Did the killer leave this as a warning? But unfortunately, it was thought to be a hoax or a prank, and the note was just tossed in the trash. It is unclear whether the girls who found it told anyone. The director of the camp didn't find out about this note until after the murders in June. I would hope that if it was brought to the attention of the director, something would have been done. Perhaps some heightened security. But this was the 1970s, so honestly, I am not sure what, if anything, would have been done. Also, remember tent number 7 had a rip in it. It was actually more than a rip. There was 4 to 5 feet missing. Was this a signal made by the killer, leading him in the right direction? But if he marked this tent, why did he move on and kill the girls in the tent next door? Some speculate that he may have been after a specific girl. They wonder if he saw the unit list and chose Kiowa because his target was staying there. But he wouldn't have known which tent she would be in unless he was watching that afternoon or evening. It would be a major coincidence if his target ended up being in the most secluded tent. I think it is more likely that he chose the tent as his target, thinking that 4 girls would be inside. Or maybe he was watching the area and noticed that only 3 girls were in that tent, and it would be an easier target. Less girls to subdue, and less likely he would get caught. He could be more in control if there were less girls. Would it have made a difference if the walkie-talkies were working? Would any of the counselors who saw strange things that night have called in their concerns into another counselor, or perhaps the director or another staff member? Remember, a counselor in the Comanche unit saw a light moving in the woods towards Kiowa between 8 and 10 o'clock. Would she have talked to someone through the walkie-talkie about this? And another counselor, around 2 o'clock a.m., in another unit, also saw lights in the woods, moving towards Kiowa. Would she have asked about this over the walkie-talkies? June 13th, 1977, was the last day Girl Scouts would sleep in Camp Scott. It was shut down and sold. It is now privately owned and used for hunters. The new owners have allowed family members and individuals with ties to the case back inside. Many of the buildings and the pool are still there. Of course, they look abandoned and are in disarray. A lot has changed in camp from this incident. I guess a lot changed overall, not just in Oklahoma, but the whole nation. Many people have started locking the doors to their homes. It seems so strange to me, but people used to always leave their doors open, especially in small towns. Security became a high priority at camps. Background checks and safety trainings were put in place. Campers and counselors at other camps after this were required to wear wristbands to show who was supposed to be at camp. Also, the ratio between camper and counselor was also lowered at other camps, so there would be more adult supervision. Also, no camper should ever be left alone with the counselor. Some camps even hired security guards. In some camps, tents were replaced with larger cabins. Kids were no longer permitted to sleep in tents by themselves, and a couple counselors may be assigned to each cabin with a group of campers. These are wonderful things now put in place to protect other campers. Denise, Michelle, and Lori were failed by the justice system, not just because their alleged killer went free, but so much more. How was Hart ever out of prison after his first crime? If he had been given the maximum of 15 years for each crime, and the sentences ran consecutively, that would be 45 years. Still too little for this type of crime, but a lot better than what he was originally sentenced to. 10 years running concurrently is ridiculous for kidnapping, rape, and if you ask me, attempted murder. Then the parole board failed the girls and the community when Hart was released after just 28 months into his sentence. That is atrocious for what he did to those two pregnant women. They were lucky to be alive. Then, after committing multiple burglaries just a few months after being released, he was able to escape the jail and was on the run for 4 years. If Hart was the killer and was in prison where he should have been, on June 12th and 13th, 1977, Denise, Michelle, and Lori would have slept through the night, awoken the next day, had a wonderful 2-week adventure at camp. They would have enjoyed swimming, fishing, boating, singing around the campfire, and getting to know each other even more. They would have been able to go back to their loving families. They would have had a chance to grow up, experience all the wonderful events in life that were taken from them. A few years ago, Lori's mom and dad were interviewed. Lori's mom stated, "For years, I asked, how could this happen? And it would be bouncing around in your mind. But you never come up with the answer. No one knows why those girls were killed and never will, because it doesn't follow the way we think. We can't think there. I'm proud of all of the families. We were 3 very different families, bound together through horrible circumstances." Lori's mom also told a story about the last night Lori was at home. Lori was a wonderful student and reader. They were packing Lori's things, getting ready for camp. Lori wanted to finish her latest book, Where the Red Fern Grows. Lori was following her mother around the house, reading out loud to her the last few pages of the book. Lori's mom explains that the story, set in northeast Oklahoma, ends sadly, of course. Billy's beloved hunting dogs, Old Dan and Little Ann, die. But it's not death without hope. The red fern that sprouts up over the dogs' graves serves not only as a memorial, but also a sign that ultimately life and love triumph over sorrow. She explained that as she listened to Lori read the last few pages the night before camp started, Sherry Farmer had no way of knowing the sorrow that just a few hours later was going to engulf her family. She tells about how years later, her family had a red fern moment of their own. A few years ago, Lori's mom recalls going back to Camp Scott with other family members, including her husband. She said it was a lot harder than I imagined it would be. She felt conflicted, feeling of needing to be there and not wanting to be there. After all, this was the place where her daughter was murdered and took her final breath. They stood at the place where the bodies were found, and she placed her hand on the tree for support. She was overwhelmed by the feelings of heaviness and darkness. In that exact moment, she saw a flash of bright colors. She explained how a beautiful monarch butterfly with orange and black wings had landed on the tree, just above her resting hand. And it just stayed there, she said. Stayed for a long time. In that moment, Lori's mom thought of many things. She wondered if the butterfly was a sign from God, from Lori. She wondered if her daughter was trying to tell her something. Maybe that she was okay, that everything was going to be all right. She explained that finally, after what seemed like minutes, the butterfly's wings stirred to life. It flitted away. 40 years after the murder of her daughter, Lori's mom stated, "I wouldn't have missed being Lori's mother for anything in the world." I can't imagine what those 3 young girls went through that night. 3 innocent little girls sleeping in their tents, only to be awoken by a monster. Denise, Michelle, and Lori and their families are still searching for justice, the justice they deserve. Thank you for joining me here today. If you enjoyed the video, please hit the like button. Also, hit the subscribe button and the bell so you will be notified of my future videos. And follow me on social media as well to see what I am working on. I still have a lot planned for the month of October. As always, have a wonderful day. Watch out for each other and keep looking for that missing link. Love ya, and see you in my next video.